She did not begin with pills, she began with silence. Long before bottles lined her bedside, Marilyn Monroe learned how to endure pain quietly. As a child, distress was something that had to be managed alone. There was no parent to calm her, no stable place to rest. Fear arrived without warning and sleep rarely followed. By the time she reached adulthood, insomnia was not a condition, it was a constant. This is where the story truly starts. Not in a bedroom in 1962, but decades earlier, when rest itself became unattainable. Hollywood did not create Marilyn Monroe's dependence on medication, it perfected it. In the studio system of the 1940s and 1950s, pills were not taboo, they were tools. Uppers to keep actors thin, alert and smiling through 14-hour days. Downers to force sleep when the lights went off. Doctors were not healers in this ecosystem, they were facilitators of productivity. Marilyn entered this world young, inexperienced and eager to please. She was praised for her beauty but punished for her sensitivity. When she struggled to sleep before early call times, the solution was immediate and normalized. A pill to rest, a pill to wake, a pill to perform. No one warned her that the body remembers. At first the medication seemed miraculous. Sleep came without fear, anxiety softened, the racing thoughts slowed. For a woman who had lived her entire life on edge, this felt like relief. Control, finally, over something that had always controlled her. But the relief did not last. Tolerance followed quickly. One pill became two became routine. What had once been occasional assistance became necessity. And necessity in Hollywood was never questioned as long as the camera kept rolling. As Marilyn's fame grew, so did the demands placed on her body. She was expected to be luminous on command, emotionally available on screen, endlessly desirable and perpetually grateful. Fatigue was treated as failure, hesitation as weakness. The pills ensured compliance. Behind the scenes, Marilyn's doctors multiplied. Each prescribed something different: barbiturates for sleep, chloral hydrate to deepen it, amphetamines to counter the fog, sometimes alcohol to take the edge off what the pills left behind. This was not reckless indulgence, it was medical chaos. There was no single authority managing her health, no coordination, no concern for interaction or dependency. The goal was short-term function, not long-term survival. Marilyn trusted doctors because she needed to. They spoke with certainty in a world that never offered her any. When they told her the pills were safe, she believed them. When they increased dosages, she complied. Authority had always been something she relied on for protection. That trust would become fatal. As the years passed, the pills stopped working the way they once had. Sleep came in fragments. Anxiety returned sharper. Her body grew confused, oscillating between stimulation and collapse. Mornings were unbearable. Nights were worse. And yet the expectations did not soften. Every missed call time, every delayed scene, every moment of visible exhaustion was recorded. Marilyn's dependence was reframed as irresponsibility. Her struggle became reputation. Difficult, unreliable, unstable. No one connected the dots publicly. No one acknowledged that the very system criticizing her had built the conditions for her collapse. The more unstable she appeared, the more medication she was given. This cycle deepened during periods of emotional stress, failed relationships, career uncertainty, public humiliation disguised as scandal. Each wound intensified her reliance on chemical relief. Pills became coping mechanisms, not luxuries. They were how she survived the day. By the late 1950s, Marilyn's body was no longer responding predictably. Mixing prescriptions became dangerous. Some drugs amplified each other, others cancelled out. Doses that once calmed her now disoriented her. Sleep came without rest, wakefulness without clarity. Her doctors disagreed on treatment. Some blamed her psyche, others blamed her discipline. None fully addressed the chemistry overtaking her system. And Marilyn, caught between conflicting instructions, did what she had always done. She tried harder. Tried to be punctual, tried to be professional, tried to be strong, tried to be worthy of the help she was given. The tragedy is that the more she tried, the deeper the dependence became. By the time the world noticed something was wrong, it was already embedded. Her nervous system had adapted to substances it could no longer function without. Withdrawal was unbearable. Continuation was dangerous. There was no safe middle ground. What looked like addiction from the outside was, from within, survival behavior that had gone too far to reverse easily. And as Marilyn moved closer to the end of her life, the pills that once offered relief began to carry a different weight. Because they no longer just helped her sleep, they held her consciousness hostage, and soon they would be blamed for everything. By the time Marilyn Monroe entered the final phase of her career, medication was no longer a background presence in her life. It had become the structure holding her days together. Sleep, wakefulness, calm, and performance were all regulated chemically. Without pills, her body rebelled. With them, her mind blurred. This was not addiction in the way tabloids would later frame it. It was dependence engineered by routine, authority, and desperation. Marilyn's doctors continued prescribing in isolation from one another. One focused on sleep, another on anxiety, another on physical complaints intensified by stress. None coordinated care. Each believed they were helping. Collectively, they created a volatile pharmacological landscape. Barbiturates remained the foundation. They were powerful, commonly prescribed, and dangerously easy to overdose on. Chloral hydrate was added to intensify sleep when barbiturates lost effectiveness. Sedatives stacked atop sedatives. The line between therapeutic dose and lethal dose narrowed silently. What made this especially dangerous was Marilyn's inconsistent absorption. Stress altered her metabolism. Alcohol, occasionally used to quiet anxiety, amplified the depressant effects of the drugs. Fatigue distorted her perception of dosage. Memory gaps formed. She did not always remember what she had taken. As her health declined, her environment grew more controlled rather than more compassionate. Studios demanded productivity, managers demanded reliability, publicists demanded image preservation. The solution offered was not rest, it was regulation. More medication, more supervision, less autonomy. Marilyn's emotional state deteriorated alongside her physical health. The pills dulled pain but also flattened joy. They quieted fear but erased clarity. She described feeling detached from herself, as if her life were happening at a distance. This dissociation, misunderstood at the time, was a known effect of prolonged sedative use. Yet it was interpreted as instability. Every visible struggle reinforced the narrative that Marilyn was broken. Few acknowledged that she was chemically overwhelmed. The pills that were supposed to stabilize her were destabilizing her perception of reality. Her attempts to reduce intake failed. Withdrawal symptoms were severe. Insomnia returned with vengeance. Panic attacks intensified. Her body had adapted to chemical sleep and now rejected natural rest. Each attempt to stop drove her back to the medicine cabinet. This is how dependence traps its victims. Friends noticed changes, speech slowed, focus drifted, mood swung unpredictably. Moments of lucidity were followed by fog. Marilyn became aware that something was wrong but lacked a clear path out. Doctors reassured her, adjusted doses, changed combinations. The problem was framed as psychological, not chemical. Responsibility subtly shifted onto her. If she felt worse, it was because she was fragile. The system absolved itself. In her final year, Marilyn's medication regimen became alarmingly complex. Multiple prescriptions overlapped. Instructions conflicted. Emergency sleep treatments were administered without sufficient monitoring. Each intervention increased risk. She was rarely left alone, yet profoundly unsupported. What is often overlooked is that Marilyn did not chase euphoria. She chased normalcy. She wanted to sleep. She wanted to wake without dread. She wanted her mind to stop racing. The pills were not indulgences. They were tools that had turned against her. The danger escalated as her tolerance grew. Doses that once sedated her barely worked. In response, doctors prescribed stronger amounts. The margin for error disappeared. One miscalculation, one forgotten dose, one overlap too many could be fatal. And Marilyn was living inside that margin every day. The public remained largely unaware. Press stories focused on tardiness and temperament. Behind closed doors, her health was unraveling. The image of excess distracted from the reality of medical negligence. She was not spiraling out of control. She was being chemically overmanaged. As 1962 approached, Marilyn's life became a balancing act between consciousness and collapse. Each night required chemical intervention. Each morning required reversal. Her nervous system was no longer regulated by biology, but by prescription. And the human body does not tolerate that forever. The pills had not killed her yet, but they had erased the warning signs that might have saved her. By the final weeks of her life, Marilyn Monroe's existence had narrowed to a fragile routine built entirely around medication. Each day was structured to manage symptoms created by the very substances meant to control them. Sleep was forced, wakefulness was artificial, emotional regulation was outsourced to chemistry. Her body was exhausted from adaptation. The warning signs were present, but they were subtle and easily dismissed by those accustomed to seeing her struggle. Increasing confusion, heightened anxiety, a growing sense of detachment, Marilyn's nervous system was no longer capable of equilibrium. It oscillated between sedation and agitation without warning. What made this period especially dangerous was the illusion of medical oversight. Marilyn was surrounded by professionals, yet no one was accountable. Doctors operated independently, prescriptions overlapped, instructions conflicted. The assumption was that someone else was monitoring the whole picture. No one was. Barbiturates remained central. They were powerful respiratory depressants, especially when combined with other sedatives. Chloral hydrate, still in use despite growing concerns, deepened unconsciousness but strained the heart and breathing. Taken together, they created cumulative suppression. This is how overdoses often happen, not in excess but in combination. Marilyn did not need to take an extraordinary amount. She only needed to take what had become routine. Her tolerance masked danger. She appeared functional at doses that would incapacitate others. This led doctors to underestimate risk. What they failed to recognize was that tolerance does not protect organs. The brain adapts, the lungs do not. As her emotional state deteriorated, her reliance on sleep increased. Nights became unbearable without chemical intervention. Anxiety intensified when rest failed. The cycle tightened. More medication was prescribed to solve problems caused by previous medication. The system reinforced itself. In the days leading up to her death, Marilyn's medication intake was reportedly adjusted. Changes in dosage, timing, or formulation can destabilize the body even further. Transitions are dangerous. Her system, already overwhelmed, was pushed into unfamiliar territory. Memory gaps became more pronounced. Confusion over whether doses had been taken was increasingly likely. This is not speculation. It is a known effect of sedative dependence. The very drugs meant to induce sleep impair the ability to track consumption. One extra dose can become invisible. The environment around Marilyn was quiet, too quiet. Her isolation meant there were fewer safeguards. No consistent caregiver monitored her intake closely enough to intervene. Responsibility remained diffuse. This is how medical oversight fails. When Marilyn finally slipped into unconsciousness, there was no dramatic struggle, no chaos, just the slow suppression of vital systems. Breathing became shallow, oxygen levels dropped, the body attempted to compensate and failed. The process was silent. By the time her condition was discovered, the opportunity for reversal had passed. Barbiturate overdoses, especially in combination with other sedatives, progress beyond rescue quickly. Once respiratory failure sets in, minutes matter. Those minutes were lost. What followed was confusion, speculation, and myth-making. Addiction narratives replaced medical analysis. The complexity of her treatment was reduced to personal weakness. Pills were blamed without context. Responsibility evaporated. It was easier to say she overdosed than to explain how she was allowed to live in such danger. The truth is less sensational and more damning. Marilyn Monroe died in a system that normalized pharmaceutical dependence, failed to coordinate care, and dismissed warning signs because they were inconvenient. She was not reckless, she was overwhelmed. The pills did not kill her in isolation. They killed her because no one stopped them from accumulating, because no one took ownership of the total risk, because no one treated her as a whole human being rather than a collection of symptoms. Her death became a symbol, but the lesson was ignored. Marilyn Monroe did not die because she loved pills. She died because she trusted them, and because the people who prescribed them never protected her from the danger they created. In the aftermath of Marilyn Monroe's death, the narrative settled quickly, too quickly. Pills were named, causes were listed. The world was given a simple explanation for a complex collapse. It was framed as an overdose, a tragic but personal failure, an inevitable end to a troubled life. This version required no further questions. Official reports concluded that her death resulted from acute barbiturate poisoning. The language was clinical and final. What it did not address was how those barbiturates accumulated, who prescribed them, or why safeguards were absent. The conclusion closed the case without opening accountability. Marilyn's medical care was treated as background noise rather than the central mechanism of her decline. In the days that followed, responsibility dispersed. Doctors defended their decisions individually. No single prescription appeared excessive on its own. Each was justified. Each was routine. Each could be defended in isolation. Together, they formed a lethal system. The public narrative shifted toward morality rather than medicine. Addiction became the headline. Dependency became character flaw. Marilyn's death was absorbed into a familiar archetype, the fragile star destroyed by her own excess. This framing protected everyone else. It protected the doctors who overprescribed, the studios that demanded chemical performance, the culture that normalized medicating emotional pain rather than addressing it. By focusing on Marilyn's weakness, the system avoided scrutiny. Her life was reduced to a cautionary tale rather than examined as a warning sign. What was rarely discussed was how common her situation actually was in Hollywood at the time. Sedatives and stimulants circulated freely. Sleep was managed chemically. Anxiety was suppressed pharmacologically. Marilyn was not an anomaly. She was simply the most visible casualty. The difference was that her sensitivity made her more vulnerable. Her body absorbed stress deeply. Her mind processed emotion intensely. What others endured numbly, she felt fully. That made the drugs feel necessary, and that necessity made them dangerous. In the years following her death, myths multiplied. Conspiracies replaced medical failure. Speculation drowned out evidence. The focus drifted away from the most uncomfortable truth. Marilyn Monroe was failed by modern medicine long before she was failed by herself. Even today, discussions of her death often emphasize intent rather than environment, whether she meant to die, whether she took too much knowingly. These questions distract from the reality that she was living in a constant state of chemical risk. Intent becomes irrelevant when systems are negligent. Marilyn's legacy, however, has begun to shift. With time, the medical context has become clearer. Barbiturates are now recognized as dangerous, imprecise, and lethal in overdose. Chloral hydrate has largely disappeared from practice. Polypharmacy is acknowledged as a major risk factor. The very treatments that surrounded Marilyn are now viewed as cautionary failures. Yet the emotional damage remains. Marilyn Monroe continues to be remembered as a woman undone by addiction rather than as a woman caught in a pharmaceutical trap she did not fully understand. She was not careless with her life, she was trying to survive it. Her death should not be remembered as the story of pills alone, but as the story of a culture that medicated pain instead of listening to it, a system that prioritized output over well-being, a profession that treated symptoms while ignoring cause. Marilyn Monroe did not die because she lacked strength. She died because she was asked to function beyond human limits and given chemicals instead of compassion. The pills did not kill her suddenly. They killed her gradually. Through normalization, through denial, through silence. And in that silence, a woman who only wanted rest was lost forever.